In the middle of a Filipino jungle, 36-year-old Martin Sheen is having a heart attack. He crawls for a quarter of a mile looking for help, not sure if he'll live or die. But he knows he can't tell anyone what happened, in case the studio pulled the hugely over-budget production of the masterpiece that is Apocalypse Now. This wasn't the only disaster that happened on the set of the movie, an Oscar winner showcasing the horrors of the Vietnam War. Both the production and the conflict it was based on were massively expensive, featured dissent from those involved, and led to controversial death.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
This video will explore and navigate through the death-trapped jungle that was the Apocalypse Now set, exploring why it was a real hell on Earth that also cost the Earth to produce, why the acclaimed movie almost didn't make it to screens, and what extreme measures the team behind the scenes needed to use to overcome the odds and make one of the best movies of all time. It's time to start a wild ride that the Valkyries would be proud of. Why was the production of this movie so bad? In the words of director Francis Ford Coppola,
"We were in the jungle, there were too many of us, we had access to too much money, too much equipment, and little by little we went insane."
But that doesn't tell the full story. What was it that caused Martin Sheen to have a heart attack on set and cover it up as heat stroke? Back in 1976, Coppola had agreed to turn Joseph Conrad's epic novel, Heart of Darkness, originally based in the Congo, into an on-screen spectacle about the Vietnam War and a near-impossible mission of one US soldier trying to bring a commanding officer down. He needn't have bothered because everyone on set was determined to self-destruct anyway. This wasn't helped by the grueling filming conditions. Shooting in the harsh jungles of the Philippines was only supposed to last 4 months, and with a budget of $12 million when Coppola first switched his camera on in 1976. But filming wrapped in May of 1977 after a mammoth 236-day schedule. Even for a backpacker, that's a long time away from home. Slowly but surely, everyone on set was going as crazy as Marlon Brando's character, and we'll look at the issues the veteran actor caused on set later. But back to the start of shooting, and the first problem Coppola had to deal with was a very significant one. After reviewing the first shot, which had taken several days to get in the can, he wasn't happy with Harvey Keitel's performance as Captain Willard, and he was fired. The footage was essentially more useless than a desk fan on set, so Martin Sheen was flown in promptly to let shooting continue. Keitel may have been a little bit miffed at the time, but it was a lucky escape for him and his heart. 2 months into production, and the luck wasn't turning. However, the wind was, and heading straight for set. Typhoon Olga took a vacation to the Philippines and caused widespread devastation. It didn't love the smell of napalm in the morning, so much so that it ripped through the location filming and forced the production to shut down for months. Once again, adding to delays and the already overinflated budget, which we'll have a closer look at later. The set pieces were particularly important for this shoot. For such an ambitious project, it was always going to be a difficult challenge to film. Way before the days of digital technology, Coppola had no choice but to use practical methods to achieve the dramatic action sequences needed to tell his story. This included constructing huge sets in intense jungle conditions, borrowing and using real helicopters and other military equipment supplied by the Filipino government, plus coordinating extras, who probably assumed they were in a real war. And speaking of which, while filming the movie's iconic helicopter attack sequence, it wasn't uncommon for the Filipino pilots to suddenly abandon their extremely choreographed and extremely expensive shots to answer the call and battle insurgents in other parts of the country. Even Christopher Nolan would agree that's a little too real for filming. What was also a little too real were the actors and their meltdowns, which were happening on and off camera, assuming these cameras hadn't been blown away by a typhoon. The actors on the set of Apocalypse Now were completely out of control. They made natural disasters, local warfare, and medical emergencies look like a walk in the park, rather than a trek through the jungle. During the casting process, Laurence Fishburne lied about being older than his age of 14 to get onto set. He probably wished he hadn't after almost a year in the hellscape. In the opening scene of the movie, Martin Sheen lies on a bed beneath a spinning ceiling fan in a Saigon hotel room, does some martial arts moves, and the first bars of The End by The Doors begin to play, and suddenly he sees himself in a mirror and punches the glass, slicing his hand open in the process. All of this is real. It was Martin Sheen's 36th birthday, he'd been drinking all day, had a problem with alcohol, and imploded for real, with a cut to his hand unleashing a world of pain. Coppola cut the cameras, but Sheen begged for them to stay rolling as a form of therapy. Months later, he'd have an even bigger medical emergency to deal with. When the cast and crew arrived on set with a 14-year-old child in tow, they were shocked to find Marlon Brando had exploited the fact that he was one of the biggest stars in the world at the time. With him at the top of his game, he managed to leverage a huge level of power and demands when he signed on to play Colonel Kurtz. After being guaranteed a $3 million salary for 3 weeks of work, which I wouldn't say no to, $1 million of which had already been paid before a fake gun was even fired, Brando arrived looking like he'd eaten the book Heart of Darkness rather than reading it. For someone who needed to look like he was in the military, Brando looked about as likely to do a push-up as a snake in the jungle. Brando's love of McDonald's rather than acting now had Coppola needing to rework the film's ending, constantly improvising with Brando around narrative, theme, and the mechanics of shooting, which is another way of saying he looked fat on camera. Along with cinematographer Vittorio Storaro, Coppola filmed Brando in shadow to project a metaphorical sense of soulful darkness and inner turmoil onto his character, but mainly to conceal his gut. It ended up being a happy accident, as this contributed to the film's underlying theme of the battle between good and evil, even though it all came from the battle between Brando and his cholesterol. But Coppola's headaches with his cast had only just begun. While playing a wacky photojournalist who spent too much time in the jungle, Dennis Hopper decided to go a little too method with the role and take a lot of wacky substances which didn't lend itself to him remembering his lines. He was so bad to work with that the other guy who'd let himself go, Marlon Brando, considered him too difficult to share scenes with. That's like an alcoholic telling you you've probably had a bit too much to drink. They got round the issue of not being in the same place at the same time by shooting their scenes separately. It was a lot harder to get around the other issue of Hopper being a space hopper on a regular basis.
But all that in the scene. I do, but you see the director says, you don't know your lines.
In fact, the actor even tried to land one of the strangest contracts in the history of Hollywood. When Coppola asked him, "What can I do to help you play this role?" Hopper replied with, "About an ounce of white powdery substance that isn't talc." Except he didn't call it that. Use your imagination. Several months into filming, as Apocalypse Now clocked in at over a year in production, Martin Sheen, who is essentially in every scene and the driving force behind the film's narrative, starts to feel a pain in his chest. He's having a heart attack. Not the kind that Coppola had when he read the movie's balance sheet, but an actual heart attack. After crawling to the side of the road, he struggled for a quarter of a mile to reach help and was picked up by a bus. Sheen got airlifted to a hospital in Manila, and a priest read his last rites in language that the actor couldn't understand. As word of this health crisis spread like wildfire, the nature of why Sheen was in hospital was kept a secret to avoid the production being pulled, but Coppola was still forced to either postpone the shooting of crucial scenes or use a body double for Sheen. Enter Joe Estevez, Sheen's brother. Quick side note fact, Estevez is Sheen's birth name, which is why one of his actor sons is called Emilio Estevez and the other Charlie Sheen. Anyway, Joe Estevez was drafted in and even helped with some of the voiceover, to the point where Coppola has admitted he couldn't even remember which brother was which when re-watching the movie. The issues weren't limited to the human cast on set. At the end of filming, the director made the decision to intercut the moment of Kurt's death with images of a water buffalo being butchered. Having seen a buffalo killed for real by a Filipino tribe, Coppola wanted his own shot, and with animal protection laws not really being a thing over there, the director was okay to allow the tribe to recreate this gruesome act, and for him to capture it on film. Animal rights activists were not best pleased for obvious reasons. After all, it wasn't exactly fair. The buffalo had turned up on set in the right weight category at least. Coppola didn't have so many issues with some of the extras on set because of their unbelievable patience, but also for a grisly reason. The unenviable actors playing the severed heads were in their boxes buried for a health and safety anxiety dream of 10 hours straight, from 8 in the morning until 6 at night. In this time, Coppola did 38 takes, and to save them from becoming actually dead, they needed to be shielded from the baking sun by umbrellas, like a buried alive tennis player. Speaking of which, for weeks, rumours went around the production staff that some of the dead bodies in the background of scenes were actual human remains, but these were just seen as ridiculous stories. When producer Gray Fredrickson looked into it, he discovered that the props team had got themselves real cadavers from a medical school supplier. Then it later came to light that the supplier was actually a grave robber. The police found out about this, arrested everyone on set, and took away their passports until they realised what had happened and weren't as fussed by grave robbery as they were a potential serial killer. When they were done with the controversial props, no one was interested in burying the bodies twice, so soldiers took them away in a giant truck, as they said concerningly, "Don't worry, we'll dump them somewhere." All this chaos on set was opening up cracks to form a money pit that was slowly getting more burned than the set. How did a $12 million budget become one of over $30 million, or $165 million in today's money? We've already seen a few examples, from sets getting destroyed to Marlon Brando's food allowance, but there are a lot of other reasons why the movie had money issues. It didn't help that an entire scene set in and around a plantation costing hundreds of thousands of dollars to stage and execute was ultimately axed in the editing suite because apparently it was considered superfluous to the story and didn't contribute to the narrative line. They could have saved themselves a penny or two by figuring that out by reading the script. That typhoon I mentioned earlier meant the entire Playboy Playmate set was annihilated, delaying scheduled location filming for a month, and also meant sending huge numbers of the cast and crew to return home until they were needed. If that wasn't enough, the entire payroll was stolen at one point. With the movie already running 6 weeks behind schedule and millions of dollars over budget before they'd even filmed half of it, Coppola was forced to file a $500,000 insurance claim for storm damage and guarantee a loan from Studio United Artists that would see him pay the excess costs out of his own sweaty pocket, if the film couldn't bring in over $40 million at the box office. We'll find out later if it managed this. Add to that the fact that most of the money needed to come from Coppola anyway because no one wanted to touch the movie, and that was before production had even started. So he faced financial ruin if he couldn't finish the film. No wonder then that the shoot gave Coppola an epileptic seizure, and on 3 separate occasions he threatened to bring his life to an end. Then once the filming had finished, the work was far from done. Its release was postponed several times because the director had to edit over 1 million feet of film. That's almost as much as the average content creator has to edit every week. During its premiere at the Cannes Film Festival, it was screened as a work in progress, getting the not-so-coveted record as the first time an unfinished film was ever played at the festival. But in better news, it was also one of the few times there was a tie for the coveted Palme d'Or, with the movie winning the prize along with another but very different wartime movie, The Tin Drum. It received a glowing reception from audiences and critics, won a Best Cinematography Oscar out of the 8 it was nominated for, as well as countless other awards. Was the hell worth it? What do you think? Tell us in the comments. No doubt the studio probably thought it was, as it went on to gross over $104 million worldwide, which would be over $500 million today. But this isn't the only movie that took a painstaking amount of time to produce, but smashed it at the box office. I've done a video on the original Terminator, looking on how its effects maybe don't stand up as well as Apocalypse Now does today.